we got to talk about what happened in yesterday's Formula One, because we didn't think we'd be talking about Formula One in this show, but then it was quite interesting because obviously the incident between George Russell and Max Verstappen, but then in the media, and I've got the quote here, right, and I don't know if George Russell, why he felt the need to bring Dan Ticktum into this, but the question was, it says, is there any other driver in the world that would do this? And George Russell goes, not in Formula One, maybe Formula E. Yeah, maybe one of the British drivers in Formula E. And I'm like, why? Like, why would you say that? Like, poor Dan Ticktum is trying his hardest, right, in my opinion, to reinvent himself, right? To kind of show you, this was who I was once upon a time, right? And he's done the documentary, and I know George Russell has not watched the documentary. We all know George Russell has not watched that documentary,
He hasn't got time for
right?
that.
So he hasn't seen it, to be fair. But Dan Ticktum's kind of invented himself. It was an incident that happened,
10
years ago, right?
It was 10 years ago.
So, and you've decided to dig that out and add fuel to the fire in this Dan Ticktum thing. And fair play to Dan, came out with a great piece of audio. Basically, I knew Dan wouldn't care, right? And he took it all well in his stride. But I want to get your opinions, and we want your opinions on this and what you think with the Dan Ticktum situation. We'd love to hear from you guys and add to this.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, like Dan came out with a perfect response to it. The thing is, like, his response, some people will twist that in different ways because it's Dan Ticktum, and that's the thing, and that's what's really annoying at the end of the day, because we've seen Dan become a better driver, and yes, occasion a better like
version of himself
thing. But like I've said it before on the show, the amount of times I've like read comments about the rookie drivers, do not media train them one bit. But the thing is, those same people will comment about Dan's incident 10 years ago and how he reacts to the media. Because, and there was the incident in Monaco where he said he wanted to punch someone for the team messing up his car. And and the thing is, people praise drivers for the heat of the moment, and the amount of backlash that there is for the swearing fines that Ben Sulayem's trying to implement, and like more and more people are wanting them to be brutally honest about everything. Dan is brutally honest about everything. He will not mince his words, but he and the thing is, but he's felt the brunt of when he hasn't minced his words, and he's had to reel that in a little bit over the years. And it's got to a point where I think that he's finally found like a happy medium. Mm-hmm. Yes, the comment in Monaco was a little bit over the line, but his response to yesterday's comment by George Russell was honestly fantastic. I thought it was I thought it was very tongue in cheek.
Of course,
but
Dan style.
It was very Dan, and I thought it was a very good sort of response to him. So yeah, Team Ticktum all the way.
We wanted to talk about George Russell and
Yes, hello,
what
George.
happened with Dan Ticktum at the end.
Yes.
I thought it was a low blow. I didn't think it was necessary for him to even bring it up. I didn't, he could have just kept his mouth shut in a sense. I don't know why he felt the need to do it.
Okay. Well, first things first. Evening, George. Evening, Dan. Hope you're both well. First things first, Dan, why have you not included my name and caption in the post of mine you've taken? Because that would have been some nice views for me. A bit annoyed about that. It's done 87,000 views, so I think that's viral. It's also gotten comments from Jeff's commented, which is quite interesting, thinking that George is talking about him. Jake Hughes has also commented, so I'm very slowly rounding up FE grid on this.
I also commented. Whoa.
You also did. In my eyes, okay. First things first, all right. give Dan the massive credit he deserves. He handled that.
Oh,
He couldn't
brilliantly.
have handled it better. It was hilarious. You know, it was a hilarious response. The fact he's kind of turned into a positive. I think fair play to the guy. Thing with George, you've got to remember there are some circumstances here. George has just come out of a really intense F1 race where it was so hot, the adrenaline is still absolutely bubbling in your system. You say things you don't necessarily mean. You've also got to remember the incident he'd just been involved in with Max Verstappen, which is arguably the most controversial incident of not only this season, but probably in the last couple of years, I would argue. It's a hard one because at the end of the day, George was asked the question, is there anybody else, other than Max, in any other championship who you think would do a move like that? Would you rather him say no, but then be lying, or just be honest? And I think the thing is, though, with this, I think you can't really look too much into it because you don't know. I don't know George or Dan personally. Of course, I know Dan professionally. You don't know if, for example, maybe they're friends. You never know. Maybe they've obviously they've raced against each other, so maybe they've grown up together. You don't know their relationship, whether they're joking about this personally behind the scenes and stuff. So it's difficult because I don't see that George did anything wrong, to be honest. Because ultimately, he's a Formula One race winner. He can kind of say what he wants, given that he's in Formula One and is doing good at it. But more importantly, it was jokey the way he said it. It wasn't seriously, but he was asked a question. So, and I'm somebody who quite likes it when drivers just honest, because it then creates these cool little back and forths and gets more people involved. So yeah, was it out of order? Perhaps a little bit, but I think there's so many outside factors to take into consideration that, this way, Dan seemed to care about it, not really, and I think that kind of tells the story that actually it's a non-story.
Oh, of course, I think we all know that, but it was just when you're digging something up from 10 years ago, and as I said earlier in the show, it's like, he probably is not. Dan's tried to change his perception around him, and he's tried to shrug off and put that in the past
I agree with that
and move on, and then you're just. He's trying hard to move away from that person that he was, and then you keep bringing that person back. And it's just like, well, the poor guy is trying his hardest to reinvent himself, and people are still taking these cheap shots. And you just feel like...
Look at the bright... Yeah. Look at the bright side. George Russell clearly watches Formula E, so I'll take that any day of the week.
Very true.
Very... the thing, though, I get that point in that, Dan is trying to change his image. But this is where, unfortunately, it goes back to the point of the reason he's having to change his image is because of what he done. Obviously, George is a similar age of him, so knows exactly what he did. Lando Norris knows exactly what he did because he was in that race.
Yeah.
So there are so many things to consider, and it's almost like one of those things like, yes, Dan's trying to change his image and is doing a very good job of it. One thing I will say is that it's quite clear that Formula E have very much changed. It's going to sound the way they use Dan. In certain, where for recent years, it's always been every single clip of an angry radio message has been Dan, or somebody doing something wrong, it's always been Dan. Whereas now all of a sudden everything's positive, and it's almost like they're trying to force that down your throat a little bit. It doesn't feel like what Formula E are doing a natural. You almost wonder if things have been said behind the scenes of, can you do this more? Because actually the thing is though, Dan is a really, really good driver and a really good guy, and he's quick. I don't think he needs this kind of Formula E forcing all of this down us to get a message across. Because for those who watch Formula E, will know that Dan is not that driver he was so many years ago. He's actually a great talent. So we'll see. But, I get both sides of it. I think there's so much adrenaline and everything in Formula One, and that's, George knows Dan quite clearly. Dan knows George. If it was something that really annoyed Dan, then I think his reaction would have been very different in my eyes. So I think at the end of the day, fans might see this as George having a low blow. Ultimately, I don't even think Dan sees it like that, in all honesty. I'd be wrong. Who knows?
Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.